He doesn't even feel bad, like not even a little bit.
No.
Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. We have just finished watching House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 5. Oh, it's a little cameo.
That is Loki. Thor, we lock in the room because he doesn't behave.
Yeah, he would be all over the place. He'd be knocking over
He almost knocked over the mic.
He crazy. Honestly, my biggest takeaway from this episode, Rhaenys was very much like an example of a woman who really learned how to really stand her own in this world amongst all these powerful men. She had the respect of those men. It wasn't just that she could handle herself, but the men respected her. The men revered her as well because of just how she managed to carry herself. I found it very fitting that the episode that is the fallout of her death is very much an exploration of so many of the women in the show, beyond just Rhaenyra and Alicent, but just how a lot of the women in the show navigating how they're going to sort of stand their own and define themselves in this world, and also showing us the impact of other women in the series that are no longer here. See, with Alicent, what's happening with her on the council. And I mean, she tried. She made a very good effort to sort of say, I deserve to do this. I deserve to be the person in charge here. And then we kind of see how that fell apart. And that's honestly sort of a prison of her own making. She put those building blocks in place to follow on top of her. You have Rhaenyra, who I know that people are so anxious and excited to get to the Rhaenyra of the books that's ruthless and just goes for it. And I just think that they want us to wait.
Yeah.
I think they want us to see how she becomes that. And I think this is just the very beginning. She's finally naming these people are not respecting me and I have to do something. And she's trying to figure that out. The person who I really appreciated this episode was Baela. I loved the time that we got with Baela, and that conversation with Corlys, I feel was her version of that. She goes to him obviously on this errand for Rhaenyra to get him to be her hand. But in that conversation, she also really asserts herself. She checks him.
Yep.
And rightfully so. He has a right to wallow, that he's been through a lot, but she does check him and she really tells him about himself and herself. And she puts herself in this lineage of women who were powerful and fearless. She's Rhaenys died how she wanted to in fire and glory, just like my mother did, and just like I want to too. Mm-hmm. And for the first time, Corlys offers to actually do the thing that people have been telling him to do, which is to give Driftmark to one of these girls. And she tells him no, which I just think is another thing of just she's finding her own, she's standing on her own 2 feet amongst this world that is dominated by men. Obviously, we'll talk more about Daemon and the vision with his mom, but Lena showing up, that was the thing I most appreciated in this episode, was how it was sort of showing we've lost this powerhouse of a woman, and now we're gonna watch and see how all of these other women in the wake of what happened to her are now sort of confronted with, okay, now what am I gonna do? Who am I gonna be?
What I would also add to where Rhaenyra's story arc is going is I think the slow progression of getting to where Rhaenyra is in the books, to me, humanizes her a lot more.
Yes.
From reading it in the book and seeing the text is one thing, but watching it on a television show without it becoming too much of a caricature or without it becoming too much of it feeling like a trope, I think seeing that progression for me as a viewer, and perhaps this is what the writers were wanting, is once she gets there, you have a complete narrative arc of how she got there. When she makes questionable decisions, the impact is going to hit a lot more. And I can imagine it's similar to where they would like to go with Alicent. That scene, it's a thing that they do in television all the time where the audio kind of goes out, it gets a little echoey, kind of your ears are plugged a little bit. It hones in on her. The camera continues to move in. She's also reaching her breaking point.
Yeah.
Both of these women, they're moving in a direction that will inevitably get to where they were in the books. But also, I think another side of it is if we get there too early, where do we take their story?
Yeah.
What does growth look like for her character for the next 2 seasons that we get? Another thing that I really liked is that it shows us where Baela's moral standing is. It would add a lot of tension, obviously, to Rhaenyra's kids, her and Rhaenyra / Strong. They have one other kid that would have taken it. So that could have been another contest if that was a direction that Baela wanted to go. But it kind of shows a little bit of like, I'm not in it for that.
Yeah.
I think that was something that she kind of learned from Rhaenys. Rhaenys didn't love Rhaenyra, but I think Rhaenys understood that it would be a shame if Rhaenyra experienced what I went through. And I think that is a kind of lesson that Baela probably took from.
Yeah, I think this was a good way to follow up, to show, like you're saying, like sort of her legacy, like the impact that she has left on all of these women who like sort of watched her as they're growing up and saw just who she was and how she stood in all these rooms.
Yeah. It's a little sad too, because it kind of feels a little bit about like that like 40s through 70s era in like our own country's history. Like there are these women that like as age and time goes on, like we lose those legends. And Rhaenys to me feels like that she's in that category of like what she went through and how she navigated through that is so inspiring. Like we're losing recipes a little bit. You know what I mean?
But also we're keeping them.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Let's talk about Daemon.
Yo.
Now listen.
Oh my God.
Before we talk seriously about it, which we will, but I have withstood a lot of, the way that incest is just a thing in this world, okay? Yeah. And we've spoken about our thoughts on that on this platform. But your mom? When it started and we were like, who is that? And in my head, I was like, that's his mom. I in my head, I knew it, but I didn't want to say it because I was like, there's nobody else it could be. It's not Emma.
Yeah.
It's not Rhaenyra. It's not Rhaenys. It's got to be his mom. But I was like, please, no.
You know what? I think I had a different interpretation. I think that was like, all right, I'm trying to be as serious as I can with this because it's kind of funny, just a little bit. It's a trope that you see in like books or in movies and TV shows. A very troubled young man where like maybe there's like some like erectile dysfunction, right? They can't get it up, or they're having like intimacy issues. And then the thing that drives them to finally going to therapy is that like they had a nightmare of something with their mom, or like they're trying to have intercourse with a partner and then their mom pops up. And I think it's a trope that gets used to drive in like the core problem that the guy is having. Their mommy issues is relating to like intimacy issues, or their issues with their mom is leading into like why they can't get it up. So that's kind of where I went with it, because what Alice Rivers says is that it's a shame that like you didn't get to know your mom really.
Right.
And so I wonder if that's another wound that they're probably trying to explore a little bit.
I definitely think you're right. It was just uncomfortable to me. I feel the way I felt about that scene in JJK with what's her face? May.
Jesus, bro.
It's like, I get that you're trying to do something and say something here. I just don't like that I had to experience that. That's really all. I definitely like what you said, because honestly, I was like, I know this means something, and I know it has something to do with his mom, but I just was disturbed that I couldn't think deep on it.
I'm trying to remember where else I saw it. Maybe was it Sex Education?
Oh, because he was having those issues.
Yeah, I think I can't remember what the main, but I know Maeve is what the girl that he was trying to get with. He couldn't get it up.
Yeah.
And then while they're doing it, he flashes and he sees his mom in that moment. And then he like panics even more. But like the show had already sort of explored the deep-seated issues that they were having with each other and how that tied into how he views intimacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's where my mind kind of went when I saw that. But I'm like, I know why they went that route, but man,
what I find most fascinating about Daemon's story arc right now is like everybody in the show, everybody watching the show is like, what is he going to do? What is he going to do? Like, is he going to betray Rhaenyra? Is he not going to? And I think that the reason why nobody knows is because I don't think Daemon knows.
Yes.
I think he also is unsure of if he is actually capable of betraying Rhaenyra. And all of these visions, it's like him testing himself of like, who am I really? Where am I headed? And where am I going? The first vision that we saw with young Rhaenyra, it was like a reckoning of like the damage that I've done and like taking responsibility. It's implying that he's thinking about other people the same way, like you were talking last week with Aemond, and like he's sort of realizing the impact that he's had on them. But then also we have the vision where he cuts off Rhaenyra's head and he's like, oh, I just did that. And then in this vision with his mom, she's also like telling him like all the things that he says to himself, right? Like, you were the first true heir. Like, if only you had been born first. Like, Like, it's like you're just seeing like he's really at war with himself, and like nobody knows what he's gonna do because he does not know what he's going to do.
Yeah. I also think this was a very revealing moment to me to show the not lack in leadership skills, but rather what Daemon's good at and what Rhaenyra's good at and what they're both not good at. Because I think the politicking, the delegating, and the sort of bureaucratic stuff that are just that it comes with the territory of the job. Daemon is objectively not good at it. He just isn't. And I think this episode really showed it. He tries to use fear and force again, and it backfires badly. And now we're yet to see what will happen with the Riverlands and Harrenhal, because that's been a very pivotal driving point that we've seen to show that whoever gets that could essentially win the war for the most part. And Daemon kind of flops. And I think he comes to reckoning that, like, it's not all just muscle. But I think from Rhaenyra's side, the fact that Daemon is a man, like, it unfortunately does help. And he is the most battle tested on her council outside of Corlys. But, you know, he's grieving right now. So he's not, like, fully present. And it would be a major advantage if he was there and he pulled in Harrenhal, and so if they were able to finish that conversation, that argument in a more constructive way, I think maybe Rhaenys could have still been alive. I think there are a number of things that could have ended differently if both Daemon and Rhaenyra had learned how to properly communicate with each other and realize we both have different strengths and skill sets that match each other in a way that it's just better if we're both here. And I think so far they haven't really learned how to work through that.
He's also learning that much of his ability to scare people into doing things is dependent on this larger idea of how people view the Targaryens and dragons in general, and just like the deference that they have for that group of people. And then we're coming up against people who don't have that. Like they don't care. I feel like if you're in King's Landing, it seems like what we're learning, it seems like, is like in King's Landing, the Targaryen propaganda has landed. Like it's hit, and those people are like in awe of them. These people are godlike. But once you step outside,
it's a little different.
They don't care. Even in terms of him, you know, being able to like just, you know, shoulder people into doing things, that can only take you so far.
Right.
When people don't have that image of the Targaryens backing you. I also like that this episode showed that, like, regardless of what happens in the end, that this sort of marks like the beginning of the end of the Targaryens. I'd always thought of it as like a very literal thing of like, well, yeah, like they go at each other, they kill a bunch of dragons, like, yeah, like they're not going to come out stronger. But also I'm realizing that it's going to poke holes in that propaganda, like in that idea of who they are. It's like it makes them just seem more human, more mortal. It just weakens their entire image as this, you know, group of people that's been reigning over Westeros for all this time. It's just going to kind of poke holes in it so that it can slowly wither away.
I love that they took this route in this episode.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It is very ironic that there are a lot of horrible decisions that led to the Targaryens' downfall throughout their history. You can point to a number of things. You can point to Aerys. You can point to Blackfire rebellions. You could point to what happens at Summerhall. You can point to the Dance of the Dragons. But I genuinely think the decision that Criston Cole made is at the top of that list, because it wasn't just dragons that kept Targaryens at the top, as you've mentioned, but also that propaganda that they pushed, this idea of exceptionalism and invincibility. Because one, they had those dragons, and as you saw, the small folk, they were like, I thought they were gods, which I would like to point out, that's going to be a plot that is going to be very intentional moving forward for those of you that have not read the books. Pay attention to that. It just sort of shows that, like, one, this wouldn't have happened if Rhaenyra was in charge in King's Landing. But two, I don't think it would have happened if Otto was still there also, because he had a very keen understanding of what propaganda looks like, because he did that after they lost Jaehaerys. And it really shows that, like, Criston Cole is out of his depths when it comes to this side of things. He just doesn't grasp it, because that propaganda side of things is crucial. A little bit of like a book nerd side of it. Targaryens like to stay within the house when they get married. And a lot of people in Westeros, a lot of the maesters in Westeros did not like that. And so I believe it was King Jaehaerys who came up with this rule. Essentially, I think they call it like the rule of like exceptionalism, where it essentially allows the Targaryens to do this this because of how special and different they are. Because they're Valyrian, they can have dragons, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They push that out there and it essentially becomes normalizing culture where like, yeah, like the whole like getting married to your uncle or your siblings is weird, but the Targaryens can do it because of that rule that was made. All of that is really necessary to keep you in power. And Cole kind of erodes that without him even realizing it. I don't even think any of the Green Council realizes it yet.
No.
Really. If you had Otto in charge, if you had Alicent in charge, that would not have happened.
Aemond. Let's talk Aemond. He doesn't even feel bad, like not even a little bit.
No.
That was the first thing I noticed. I was like, oh, he's actually a psychopath. He doesn't even feel remorse. Like,
I honestly think he's the perfect villain. The motive, backstory, he's got the charisma.
Yeah.
He's got everything that you need. I feel like they've built him up perfectly. In comparison to other antagonists in Game of Thrones, there is an insecurity that's sort of driving it, but they can't really back it up, so to speak. They like to pick on weaker opponents. Like obviously Joffrey. When Stannis comes to King's Landing, he runs away and he hides with his mom. Ramsay, I mean, he's a skilled bowsman, but like Jon just kind of pummels him. Like there really wasn't a fight at the end. And then he loses to Sansa. Like politically, she outsmarted him even with the dogs. Aemond is desperate to look for someone that can rival him. And that I really appreciate. It's a little refreshing when it comes to an antagonist. Remember in episode 8 last season, he beats Kristen Cole in that duel. And then he was like, you're going to be winning tourneys in no time. And he's like, bro, I don't care about no tourneys. I'm looking for a fight. And the only person he looks around, Daemon. He gets the biggest dragon, takes out Melees. I think he's a horrible person. Like morally, he's done some very questionable things. And I know that like there's some ifs, ands, buts of like what he could have done with Aegon and whatnot. But nonetheless, he wanted Aegon out of the way. And I think that's just a brilliant way to build up this antagonist. That dude is tough to me, bro. I'm sorry.
No, I agree.
He is him. He is literally him.
I agree. I honestly didn't have any negative feelings towards Aemond probably until last week. Like I really liked him as a character. I understood him. You're not always cool. Like I get that. And what happened with Lucerys was real tragic, although it was an accident. Until last week, I really didn't hate him.
And his motives were clear. He was bullied.
Yes.
And that's like a very relatable motive.
It is. Now, I do also want to say you do have to learn to let those things go. I also find it interesting, like they're setting it up so that on both sides, the real head-to-head between both sides won't be able to happen until like the infighting has been a little bit more sorted out, because you have Aegon and Aemond on Team Green. And like, I mean, Aegon's gonna wake up and he knows what happened.
What Aemond did, yeah.
Like he for sure. Nobody else is gonna say it, but he knows.
How is Alicent gonna navigate now with Aemond in charge?
I think that scene in the brothel did show like Aemond is a very human person who is like, he is hurt. Yeah. And he is searching for something. While Aegon was sort of coddled growing up because he was the heir, so they had to protect him from the consequences of all his choices. So he never really learned how to like muscle up in the face of challenge. But Aemond had to do that. Number one, because he always had to prove himself because he didn't have a dragon. That's really probably like the main reason. Like he always had to prove himself because he didn't have a dragon. He's a second son, all that stuff. So now his response to things is to like shut that part of him down. That's probably why him and Otto related so much, because I think he compartmentalizes his feelings the same way Otto did.
Well, I'd also say the second son's element is something that shows up pretty often in this series so far. We see it with Aemond, we see it with Daemon. I think a little bit with Otto also because he is a second son. He had an older brother. They showed a little bit about this with like Velaryons being second sons to the Targaryens. That's sort of that thing that Corlys talks a bit about with Daemon in that one episode. And a lot of it is trying to will history to remember you. And what I found interesting is the Hightowers win the battle there because of Aemond, but he doesn't really get the credit.
He can't.
Right.
Yeah.
And this patriarchal system does not allow Aemond to heal because he's never going to feel like he can get the credit, even though like he won that battle and he knows that like I'm smarter, I'm stronger, I have a bigger dragon, I studied philosophy, I understand politics better,
I speak Valyrian.
Yes, he checks off all of the boxes in terms of merit.
He just wasn't born in the right order.
Right. It's very ironic how like again like this patriarchal system in Westeros, but just also in history in general, it gets left out of the conversation of how it can still hurt men. Because even though it's built to serve men, it's not an infallible structure.
Oh, obviously.
You know?
Yeah.
Aemond sort of exemplifies that. Very much so.
I do think that the smart thing for Alicent to do right now is to really align herself to Aegon. If you want to be powerful, you need to get him. Because when he wakes up, he's going to be back.
I mean, he said mummy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something I probably see her doing, as maybe she'll lean into that a little bit more so that when he does step back onto the throne, she has a little bit more of an in.
There's a few things I wanted to mention about Alicent. She couldn't imagine a world where the Patriarchy doesn't win. You could have backed Rhaenyra. You saw what Rhaenys was able to do. You could have backed Rhaenyra. And Rhaenys has more reason to not back Rhaenyra than you do, in my opinion. The second thing I think is because she doesn't have that imagination, she has convinced herself that through her like wit and will and her bond relationship with the men in her life, that she can stake her legacy in this world. She does have a great relationship with Viserys, but at the end of the day, like, he still just saw her as just like a queen. She was extremely lonely. Alicent was always lonely under her marriage with Viserys. And then you see her make that mistake with Larys. This one is a little bit more transactional, but still she had confided with him and probably made the assumption that whether he cared for her or not, that would be enough for him to choose that over a patriarchal system that is designed to benefit him more. And then she makes that mistake again with Cole. I think there were a few moments, even in the first couple of episodes in that council meeting when they weren't listening, she looks to Cole to see like, are you gonna help me out here? And he doesn't support her. And I feel like now Alicent sort of learned the hard way of like, these men are just going to be more inclined to align themselves in areas where that it will just benefit them more.
It reminds me of like pick-me's.
Yeah.
It's like kind of the same thing of like, you think that by like aligning yourself with their ideologies that you'll earn their respect. You won't, because the very ideology that you're aligning yourself with prevents them from respecting you as like an equal.
Yeah.
In that council meeting when she's, you know, stating her piece and everybody in the room was like, you're making good points. Like, you're right. You did do the job and you definitely are capable of doing it. However, we just can't do it because you're a woman. And the thing that's sad about it is like, she's one of the key people responsible for the reasoning that allows her to be overlooked. Like, you spent all this time undermining Rhaenyra's right to the throne, and so now you cannot expect these people to choose you because it's in defiance of the very thing that you have been building up this entire time.
Yes.
Like, it just doesn't work. Like, you did this. Like, you're responsible for this.
And this is kind of what Larys says, where he was like, hey, I think you'd be great, but we built this entire thing, Alicent, on saying that Rhaenyra shouldn't be queen. So we can't have you because it just compromises our entire stance. And I'm just like, Alicent, how did you not see this? The other thing that I was going to say, and it kind of ties a little bit back to just the way that Alicent has already been characterized. We talked a little bit about earlier with like the slow burn of where Rhaenyra's character goes. And there has been a lot of talk about how we should best characterize like who Alicent is. And I think this season is really solidifying that she is also on a slow burn process to where we're going to take her character. I remember in season 1 when Viserys breaks that dragon sculpture, Alicent brings that back and fixes it. And it really, in my opinion, kind of symbolizes the work that she was kind of doing at a number of instances in keeping that house together.
She was.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Viserys was going to turn on Rhaenyra a couple of times, and Alicent kind of spoke him out of that. When the whole brothel scene with Rhaenyra and Daemon, Alicent is the one that
vouches for her.
Exactly. Yeah. She kind of keeps Otto at bay for several years up until the wedding with Rhaenyra and Laenor when she finds out everything. But prior to that, she had been keeping Otto at bay with the whole like making Aegon king. And then in episode 8, she kind of like gives in before she misinterprets what Viserys says. But in this season, that same sculpture she has in her hands and it drops. And I feel like that was a little bit more symbolic of now we're going to see the role that she plays in like tearing this all apart. I think some fans were just a little too early and a little too eager to jump on wanting to get a book Alicent, that they were looking past a lot of the nuance that the show was kind of blatantly trying to tell us.
I would definitely agree. I just give it time. We have to build up to where they're going to go and who they're going to become. The scene with Rhaena and Jane Eyre, the line that Jane Eyre says to her when she's like, I don't remember the exact wording, but something along the lines of like, I hate feeling powerless. powerless.
Yeah.
And Rhaenyra's like, me too. And then you just kind of see like the ripples of that. Like Rhaenyra's whole thing in this episode is feeling powerless. Her council's not respecting her. She's not able to go out and fight in the way that she really wants to be a part of this. Jacaerys is feeling powerless. He's like, why am I not being used the way that I need to be used? So he goes out. And then again, Alicent feeling powerless. This episode it had to show us.
Sorry, I would also add Kristen Cole.
Oh, yes.
Because he realizes we have to give this war to the dragons now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think like this episode had to show us that like the impact of the first time that we really see the dragons go head to head, the impact of losing someone like Rhaenys is it brings the morale down for everybody. Nobody comes out of that feeling better than they did before except for Aemond. But everybody else is like, now that we've kind of accomplished the beginning of what we've kind of been building up to this whole time, right? Like we are in full-on war. The dragons have gone at it. We've gotten a little taste of what this is, and nobody feels victorious after it.
Yeah.
Everybody just feels powerless. I think we had to establish that because, like you were pointing out with Alicent, Rhaenyra, everything that comes from these characters as the show goes on, I think has to come from this. Like now that we've seen the reality of this situation, like how do we respond?
Very good point. HBO has been really interesting with how they've been marketing House of the Dragon as like a both sides things. They're both bad. And I understand why they're doing it. It makes sense. For me personally, it is hard for that marketing to land on me, knowing that like the main point of both the show story and the book story is like misogyny is right at the crux of it. And there's one particular side that is really pushing that misogynistic structure to stay in place. I bring that up primarily because a lot of the talking points that I see people use against Rhaenyra is how bad she was at politics or how she didn't care for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there are moments in her earlier years where that may have been true, but I think the show so far and this episode kind of confirmed that it wasn't just that Rhaenyra didn't care. I think Viserys just did a terrible job at preparing her for not just being a ruler, but for being the first queen in the Seven Kingdoms. And I think that is an important distinction when we want to talk about her story. Because I remember after he named her in episode 1, episode 2 comes around. I remember we both were like, damn, she's still a cupbearer? Like, what do you mean? And then in this episode, Rhaenyra brings up the fact that like, I learned this lord and where that land was located and that in the sigil for this house. But that isn't the only thing that these men were looking for. And I feel like he failed in teaching her how to navigate this thing that was inevitable for her to experience. That would have been the first time for her to have to deal with, because I don't think he took her as heir seriously until it was too late. And then he got sick, and then there was only so much that he could do. And so she almost had to be like a self-taught queen for the most part. But I also think that like that framing, I feel like is also just like a little unfair. The cards are already stacked against her. This idea of like trying to like cast a judgment on how well she is a leader in a system that is almost like perpetuating a culture that wants her to fail, that feels a little unfair and how you can characterize her ability as a leader. Hightowers are against her. The men in her council are being iffy about it. Viserys didn't train her properly. Daemon is being a little wishy-washy. To have to navigate through all of that while trying to keep this realm together and remembering the prophecy that Aegon has passed down, that's a lot for one person to handle with never being taught on how to navigate through this very new experience.
I think that's a really good point. Also, I don't understand that argument being used against Rhaenyra because like Aegon's no better. Like
he isn't.
Aegon was also uninterested in all of the duties required.
Nor is Daemon isn't good either.
Aegon also doesn't know how to do anything. Nobody really who is vying for this position really has all the qualifications.
No. What's funny, I love that she pointed that out to the guy on her counselor. You trying to talk about, women ain't never been to war. We've been at peace for like 100 years because of these past two kings. You ain't been to war either.
Yeah.
So what credibility do you have in comparison to me?
I think she's going to be okay. I think she just has to go through some growing pain. And I think she needs to lean on Jace a lot more.
I think she needs to lean on Jace and Baela.
Yeah.
Rhaenys was her trusted advisor, and it hurts that she's gone because Rhaenys knew how to navigate through that in a way that no one else did, because there's no other woman that made it in the way that Rhaenys did. It's just, it hurts that she's not there to kind of like protect and back her a little bit more, you know. Jace is every episode I'm like, you're proving that you'd be a great king. Every episode.
He doing it right.
Last thing that I would say is I like the angle that they're taking Corlys's character. The bit that Baela adds of he did all of that in Driftmark and the voyages that he took on to impress Rhaenys. I appreciate that angle in his character because yes, there's ambition. Yes, there's a lot of pride. There's a big ego, but he really did all of that to impress like the love of his life. And I really do like that because it's really going to show how much regret he's going to have to carry and not fully embracing and hearing her feelings and her valid concerns about the politics that they were both a part of over the last like 20 years or so. He has to carry the guilt that like she was warning him about like putting our children in danger, and then they ended up losing both of their kids. And then he had to come to grips with like, I'm doing all of this with like the throne because I really want it, and my wife is trying to tell her that like she didn't really care for it anymore. She's gotten over it, but he wasn't listening to her feelings. And then I rewatched that scene last week where she confronts him about him having two sons out of wedlock, and he gets extremely defensive and doesn't really listen to what she's trying to express in that moment. Same thing when she brings up Baela and Rhaenyra again about taking over Driftmark, and he dismisses it. I know that Corlys and Rhaenys had a pretty solid relationship, but man, did he have a lot of things that he needed to work through, and it's in very subtle ways that you can see that he still could have been a much better husband. And that moment where he finally names Baela as the heir to Driftmark, I think there was some that he was like impressed with how she stood up to him in that moment and showed her capability. But I think it was also that like, I finally see what my wife was trying to teach me. And that felt like a very good character moment, even though he only had like 3 scenes, but they did so much with his character in such short little time.
I'm interested to see where he goes.
Yeah. All right, y'all. We appreciate you all so much. Once again, we'd love to see what you all think, what you all feel about this episode. Let us know in the comments below. And again, thank you all so much for supporting us over the last year and a half now, really, which is kind of cool. But with that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.